We're going to talk now about the Islamic empires, or we're going to actually use the word caliphates, okay? The Islamic caliphates. And the first that we're going to deal with is the Umayyad. The Umayyad Caliphate. So again, following the death of Ali, as new caliphs are going to be chosen, the Umayyad family, it's a clan, the Umayyad family is going to come to power within the Islamic world. They will establish a capital in Damascus, which has been an important city for centuries. They're going to establish a capital in Damascus. Today, that is the capital of the nation of Syria. Yeah, it's the Umayyad clan. They will assume the caliphate. And then this basically becomes like a dynasty, like any other dynasty that we've talked about, maybe in China or any place else, where the father is running the show, and eventually the father dies and his son takes over, and eventually he dies and his son takes over. This is a dynastic rule, all right? And it's known as the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyads will lead to much expansion in the Islamic Empire, beginning to push out of Arabia and north into the Middle East, into what was Persia, and into North Africa. They're pushing the boundaries of their caliphate. They're growing their empire. In much the same way that Rome grew their empire. They're conquering land, right? As they expand, though, the Umayyad Caliphate gives special treatment to the Arabs within their caliphate. The Umayyads are Arabs, right? That's all original Muslims were Arabs, because they came from Arabia. But as they expand out of Arabia, they're bringing in a lot of new territory where not all the people that they're bringing in are Arabs anymore. But the Umayyads are like Arab-centric. They think Arabs should be running the show. So even if you convert to Islam, if you weren't an Arab, you had no ability to gain a powerful position within this Umayyad Caliphate. And there wasn't a whole lot of push to convert everybody as they expanded their empire. And remember we talked the other day about the dhimmi population, these people of the book, the Christians and the Jews within the Islamic world, right? They had to be tolerated, they had to be protected, but what could you do to this dhimmi population? You could persecute them in some ways, sure. But you could tax them heavier, right? You could charge them more taxes. And so you can see, maybe from here, why it would be that the Umayyads would not have a desire to convert everybody that they're coming across. Because if you convert everybody, that could hurt your tax rolls, right? That could impact how much money that you could bring in for taxes. Ultimately, the Umayyad Caliphate would expand for about the century that they ruled. Yes, ma'am?
Just sort of trying to make a connection. I know it's not exactly like...
Sure.
What about in India when Ashoka didn't want to spread the Buddhist faith?
Yeah!
So could it be similar?
I love it. I love it. Yeah, they are it's a religion. Islam is a religion, but it's also now a political entity, and they've got to think about how do we maintain political control. Well, they're going to maintain political control at least by having Arabs be the only ones that can have a say in this new government, and not pushing the conversion of everybody, because not pushing the conversion of everybody can bring in more tax dollars for the empire. Ultimately, after about a century of expansion and pushing all the way across North Africa, all the way into the northern parts of India, the Umayyad Caliphate will begin to weaken. The central authority weakens because now they've got this massive empire and they're bringing in huge amounts of money to the empire, and the caliphs are starting to live a pretty high life. Opulent life, lavish lifestyle. And it's starting to frustrate a lot of the population, especially as they grow this empire so massive. And now the vast majority of people that live within the Umayyad Caliphate's rule, they're not Arabs. So if the majority of people within the Umayyad Caliphate are not Arabs, but non-Arabs are not allowed to have any say within the political system, you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of frustration, right? And by the year 750, so they last for about 100 years, by the year 750, the Umayyad Caliphate will be toppled. And in its place will rise a new family, a new dynasty, a new caliphate called the Abbasids. The Abbasid Caliphate will pick up where the Umayyads left off. Yes, ma'am?
So are they the ones who overthrew them, or are they just
Yeah.
people who took?
There were protests and riots, but ultimately these are the guys that orchestrated the overthrow of the Umayyads. And then they now take control. And so they can claim authority that the Ummah, the Muslim community, wants them to be in charge. Yes, ma'am?
I think Umayyad has two wives.
2 Y's? Okay, I'll go with it. I might have spelled it wrong. Anyway, there's no other word that you're going to come across that's quite like it, so if it's spelled something close to that, we're good to go. I would fail, I guess, the spelling test. So, some basics about the Abbasid Caliphate. They will establish a new capital in the city of Baghdad, far to the east of Damascus. Well, it's not that far to the east of Damascus, but in the year 750, it's far to the east of Damascus.
So the capital is Baghdad?
Capital is moved to a city of Baghdad. Baghdad is a city that's going to be established in about the same place that ancient Babylon was. Yes, sir.
So you're saying that today's Baghdad is this Baghdad?
Yep. That's their Baghdad.
So it's old.
It's old. Yeah, we in America don't really have any concept of the age of things. Yeah.
You know the Euphrates and the Tigris?
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that is today's present-day Baghdad. Now, why do you think, without me giving you the answer yet, why do you think the Abbasids might move a capital from Damascus further to the east to the city of Baghdad? Yeah.
So like it's gonna become like bigger and stronger, and like you're not lose the weekend.
Okay, we're not connected to the old. We're different from the Umayyads. I like that. Yeah. Maybe to try to centralize more, which seems kind of weird as the Umayyads expanded all the way to over to here. But we've got to remember this, and I think we talked about this with Rome, and I think we're going to talk about it later with the Byzantine Empire. The money and the wealth in the world at this time is in this area. All right? This is where the rich stuff is. This ain't a lot going on. All right? In the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, not a lot going on here. So this brings them closer to the heart of what was the old Persian Empire, right? Which was at a time one of the most powerful and wealthy empires in the world. So Baghdad is more, even though it's getting further away from like here, Baghdad is more centralized when you're talking about the rich part of the world. Excellent. Yes?
I still want to say that's a really good idea because unless you want to give up your territory to the west, you really should move there.
I think they might be willing to give up some territory to the west.
Yeah.
Give up some. There ain't a lot going on over here. This is backwards. This is backward. There's not a lot happening over here at this time. All right. So this is where the rich stuff is. Yeah.
So since you said Persia was mainly Shiite,
Eventually, they're going to evolve into that. Yes, eventually, but that's going to take a little bit of time down the road.
so this whole empire.
The Abbasids are still Sunni at this point. Okay. So the Abbasid Caliphate moves a new capital to Baghdad.
That's actually really important that they're Sunni because Umayyads were Shiites, right?
No, Umayyads were Sunni. Umayyads and Abbasids are Sunni. They're all Sunni.
My question was like, how come the caliph was like the country was ruled by dynastic rule?
Yeah.
So, but the concept of Sunni was that you get to choose your ruler.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, but this is not a democratic time. So, like, the earliest caliphs were absolutely chosen. Like, Abu Bakr was chosen amongst the followers of Muhammad to be the guy because he was Muhammad's right-hand man. But as we get a little bit away from that, the Islamic world, the caliphates, kind of fall into the same traditions that other kingdoms or other dynasties would. Who gets to rule? The rich and the powerful and the strong. So if you've got some like power in your family, if you've got some people supporting you, you get to rule. But once you're in that caliph's position, you can claim the authority of all of the Ummah want you to be there. It ain't perfect, though. There's not a democracy. There's no one going to vote for these guys. And certainly, even though the dad may be a great ruler, his son might be a bonehead. It is what it is. But what happens when sons are boneheads? Dynasties fall. Or dynasties can weaken. And that leaves them susceptible to fall.
Yes.
All right, let me press. One dramatic change, if we're talking about continuities and change over time. Continuity, they're still Muslims. And guys, on your papers, don't forget about obvious continuities, like the obvious thing that stays the same. But some changes. The Abbasids are far more willing, even though they're Arabs themselves, they're far more willing to allow non-Arabs a place at the table. Non-Arabs can become military leaders. Non-Arabs can become a part of the political leadership, a part of the bureaucracy. And this is a nod to the understanding that as this caliphate grew, they've got a lot of, not like all of these Persians up here. Persians aren't Arabs. But those people, according to the Abbasid Caliphate, should have an ability to have an important role in the government. All right? So non-Arabs in the Abbasid Caliphate are going to have a say. Well, guess what? What was one of the biggest beefs that the Umayyad people had with the Umayyads? That only Arabs had a say. Well, now anybody can have a say in the government. So guess who's going to last longer, the Abbasids or the Umayyads? The Abbasids. It ain't a perfect dynasty, but they will certainly last longer. We will see during the Abbasid Caliphate what we call the flowering of Islamic learning. Like the high point of Islamic culture happens during the first couple centuries of the Islamic Caliphate. The flowering of Islamic learning, it's known as. There will be increased trade from the Western Mediterranean all the way over to China. Remember the Silk Road that we talked about? That's still there. And the Abbasid Caliphate will help facilitate trade along those trade routes. I don't even know what we would call it today. What's the road that throws things on airplanes and sends it from China to UPS facility in Kentucky? Yeah, I don't know. I think we've gone beyond the land routes of the day. Anyway, the Abbasid Caliphate will be instrumental in preserving a lot of ancient Greek texts. Yes?
While this is all going on, what's happening in Europe?
We're going to get there. Don't worry about that yet. We're going to get there. Maybe after lunch today, a little bit, at least for Eastern Europe. The Abbasid Caliphate is going to preserve ancient Greek texts. This is big, because they're going to rule the world that was once ancient Greece. And they're going to come across the great writings and the great plays and the great scientific minds and the great philosophers. And they could do one of two things with that stuff. They could destroy it and say that this is like heretical. Do we know what it is? What heresy is? Yeah. Like against the religion, right? That this is like forbidden for us to look at this stuff. And they could have destroyed it and we would have never known about it. Or they can embrace it, study it, preserve it for later generations to have and to use. They fortunately do the latter. They do the latter. You know what I mean when I say former or the latter? They do the second thing. They preserve it, which was huge for us. Because we wouldn't have known about Oedipus if not. They weren't destroying anything, but the Abbasids actually supported the preservation of these documents. The Abbasids get credit for something that they didn't actually do, but I guess it's good. India, in South Asia. Indians were using a very unique numerical system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just as we know 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Today, in our world, we call those numbers what? Arabic numerals. We call them Arabic numerals because Europeans came in contact with them in the Middle East, because the Abbasids, with their connections to South Asia, adopted those numerals. The Abbasids were using Arabic numerals. They're actually Indian numerals. And the Indians, unfortunately, aren't getting any credit for their work in mathematics, as they're now known to the rest of the world as Arabic numerals. But when you're doing math, I was just teaching my kids Roman numerals the other day. When you're doing math, it's way easier to think about like 44 as 44 rather than, anybody?
Oh, isn't it like
No. You're not allowed to put more than 3 things in a row. Yeah, you've got to do XL, because we got 50. We've got 50, and we're going to take 10 away. That's a V, not, yeah, my bad. I said it, I wrote it. We've got 50, we got to take 10 away, so we got 40, then we got to add 4. That's hard. Like, 44 minus anything, minus that, that's just confusing, right? So this works out way better for like complex mathematics. And we thank the Indians for it, but because the Abbasids adopted this in their schools and in their institutions, they've been called Arabic numerals. All right? Now, again, the Abbasids aren't going to last forever. They've created a massive multi-ethnic empire. It's going to last longer than the Umayyad Caliphate because they allow non-Muslims to have a say. But ruling massive multi-ethnic empires for long periods of time is very challenging. Because all of these different ethnicities, they ultimately maybe want to rule themselves. So eventually the Abbasid Caliphate will weaken as well. Just long-term ruling a massive multi-ethnic empire with different regions and factions wanting more autonomy. As time passes, and we're going to talk about a lot of conflict and military action against other outside empires, the population is going to have to be pressed for taxes. And this frustrates people. We're going to see a very common theme in all of these empires that we're going to talk about. And as the empire, as the central authority grew weaker, we would start to see independent kingdoms pop up on the fringes of this Abbasid Caliphate. While as independent kingdoms arise on the fringes of the caliphate, what now happens to the tax dollars collected by the central authority? They further decline.
So you're saying independent kingdoms?
Yeah. In Persia, for example. In Persia, in the 10th century. Local leaders will start to call themselves sultans or kings. Now you can start thinking about Aladdin, right?
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
And they will ultimately take Baghdad in the year 945. And a couple centuries later, some Turkish people from Central Asia, a group known as the Seljuk Turks, we'll hear about them again later, the Seljuk Turks will ultimately challenge those Persians, and they will take control of Baghdad in the 11th century. These are not times or dates or anything for our purposes that we need to memorize for the AP exam. Just know that the Abbasid Caliphate, while it existed, had trouble holding on to its whole empire. And outsiders, like Turks or Persians, came in and took them over.
So, when did they take Baghdad first?
945 at first, but you don't need to memorize these numbers. And then later in the mid-11th century. I will mention these Seljuk Turks again, because it is them who will eventually retake Jerusalem from those crusaders who had conquered it. A guy named Saladin, you might remember. We'll hear his name again later. But it was the Seljuk Turks who conquered or reconquered Jerusalem from the Christian conquerors of Jerusalem. Yes?
Is it in the picture that Saladin stabbed one guy and the guy others? And there's a picture where Saladin was a Christian picture drawn
to denigrate Saladin, probably. Yeah.
Evil and then,
Not familiar with it, but I'm sure you're speaking the truth. All right. Eventually, what brings the Abbasid Caliphate to a final end is a group that we will talk a lot about in this post-classical era, the Mongols. If you are an empire coming to an end during the 1300s, it's the Mongols that are doing it to you. We'll talk a lot more about the Mongols going forward, but a little bit of foreshadowing. They will create the largest empire that mankind has ever created. All right? Maybe challenged eventually by the British Empire, but the Brits controlled a lot of water. The Mongols control the biggest land-based empire ever in human history. Yes?
So the Seljuk Turks and the Mongols
Persians first, then Seljuk Turks, and then later the Mongols. So we just get an idea that the Abbasids are dealing with a lot of outsiders messing with them. What do you need to know for the purposes of AP World? The Abbasids are dealing with a lot of outsiders messing with them, and they ultimately fall to the Mongols. Everybody good? Sweet. A couple other areas of the Islamic world that need to be talked about. Iberian Peninsula. This is Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. In the Islamic world, we're going to refer to this as Al-Andalus. The Iberian Peninsula is Spain. We're not calling it Spain at this time period. We're going to call it Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain, the Islamic Iberian. Those of you that are in Spanish class, or those of you that know anything about Spain, know that there are some deep connections between Islamic culture and art and architecture and language and the Spanish culture and language. And so you could go in Spain to some great cities that were built during the age of Al-Andalus rule, of Muslim rule in Spain. And you will see Islamic architecture, and you will see Islamic calligraphy, and you will see Islamic tessellations in art. If those of you that are in art class, you're probably already coming across these things. Born in the early 8th century after the conquerings of the Umayyad Caliphate, the Islamic world will overtake this portion of Europe in the Iberian Peninsula. Al-Andalus became a center for Islamic learning, and it became an important meeting place between the Western European world and the Islamic world. If you were like a Western European guy and you wanted to do some serious studying, you went to Spain. You went to Al-Andalus. You went to their great capital at Cordoba in Spain.
So what did it connect? It connected
the Western European world to the Islamic world. Islam will also spread into India. Islam will also spread into India, the northern portions of India. Centered on the city of Delhi, D-E-L-H-I, we will have what's known as the Delhi Sultanate be born. A kingdom in northern India, a Muslim kingdom in northern India. And they will control northern India for about 500 years. Or pardon me, for about 300 years.
Did they like overthrow the Gupta? Or they...
Now, the Gupta were long gone. They were just other local kingdoms, but they overtook local kingdoms. Yes?
What's the name of it again?
The Delhi Sultanate, D-E-L-H-I. So the capital of India today is New Delhi. The Delhi Sultanate. And they rule India from about 1200 to about 1500. Now, when they rule India, there is going to be no widespread conversion to Islam because you've already got a dominant religion in India in Hinduism, right? But there will be a number of Hindus that do convert. What kind of Hindus do you think would be most likely to convert to Islam?
the lower classes.
Very good. They've kind of got a lousy existence within Islam, or within Hinduism, and Islam promises an equality of all believers, like in the eyes of God. It shouldn't surprise you that the majority of Muslims today in India live in northern India. Or in this country today, what is this country represented by my hand? Today is Pakistan. Today's Pakistan is pretty much all Muslim. Yes?
When did they spread to India? Like northern India?
When?
Yeah.
They spread in the earliest centuries of expansion, but by 1200 there's actually a Muslim kingdom in northern India.
So it was called Delhi Sultanate.
The Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate.
Is there anything more we need to know?
Nope. Also, we're going to see some expansion of Islam into Indonesia, and I think I've got another map here. We're going to see some expansion of Islam into Indonesia. Indonesia, look at it, it's a bunch of islands. Hard to conquer militarily. Islands are tough to take over militarily. So how do you think Islam expands without knowing it? How do you think it? Maybe through missionaries, but primarily through merchant activity. Trying to make money, trying to do business, trade with Indonesia. And Islam will be taken to Indonesia, and it is there that it will flourish almost like no other places in the world. To today, in Indonesia, not anywhere in the Middle East, not Pakistan, Indonesia is the most populous Muslim nation in the world today. there was Buddhism that went into Indonesia and Southeast Asia, but Islam by far is the biggest religion within. There's also Hindus in Indonesia, but by far Islam will become the dominant religion in Indonesia. And today more Muslims live in Indonesia than anywhere else in the world. Islam will also spread into Africa, of course from those earliest expansions by the Umayyads, but then hopping across trade routes. Remember the trans-Saharan trade routes? Across the Sahara Desert to connect with some sub-Saharan African empires. Places like Ghana, or Mali. These sub-Saharan African kingdoms will adopt Islam. These kings of these places like the idea of the caliphate. They like the idea that one guy can be not only the political ruler, but also the spiritual ruler. Because it gives him what we call legitimacy. Why do you get to rule us? Whoa. You're connected with the religion too? Oh, okay, I see why. You're now legitimate. I see that you get to be a leader of me. It gives them legitimacy. And you guys might have heard of the story back in maybe 7th grade geography about a great king named Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, the king of the Mali Empire in sub-Saharan Africa. And Mansa Musa, during his reign, will go on the most epic Hajj, all right, of all time. He amasses a massive caravan to demonstrate his wealth to the world. And he takes that caravan from sub-Saharan Africa all the way across the Islamic world on his way to Mecca for his Hajj. And he demonstrates the wealth and the power that he enjoyed in Mali. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, some convert to Islam. Some maintain their traditional beliefs. We never have an end to traditional African beliefs. But what we see more often is what we call a syncretism of beliefs. Islamic beliefs, Islamic practices blend with local traditions. So, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, because of some matrilineal traditions, some like women, like the family lines passing through the moms, we see less patriarchy in Islam in sub-Saharan Africa than we do in other parts of the world, because they've adopted some local customs.